Welcome to another episode of the Supply Chain Dialogues. I'm Daniel Haumig. Today's episode will be the last one for a while. After 2 years of podcasting and business and sustainable consulting, I will focus on finalizing my dissertation now. After that, we will expand the results of the research with over 6,500 companies in the discrete manufacturing world into a hopefully thought-provoking book about what it takes to achieve a viable turnaround towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions, providing a path forward versus the otherwise pretty bleak future that academic literature and as well the political landscape in many countries currently offer. That will take most of this year. So we thought we would divert from the usual focus of this podcast once again and cover some of the personal lessons learned from the last 2 years. And to do that, I'm joined once again by my AI co-host, Amy.
This is quite a special episode, your swan song before our hiatus. After discussing supply chains, sustainability, and global business challenges, we're tackling today something more personal to our listeners, transitioning from corporate leadership to the next phase in life.
Indeed. After 38 years in corporate life, including roles as COO, CPO, and board member across multiple industries and continents, I went through this transition myself in 2022. Today I'll share insights that I wish someone would have told me before I made this journey.
Let's start with something provocative. Many executives spend decades planning corporate strategies, but surprisingly, little time planning their next chapter. Why is that?
That hits close to home. It's fascinating. We train to do detailed 3 to 5 year plans for businesses, but when it comes to our own lives, post-retirement, many of us just have some vague notions about golf and I will travel, or like to continue doing the same stuff that they did before, but just in a different packaging.
So what framework would you suggest for approaching this transition?
Like in business, you need to start with clear purposes and goals and be humble enough to accept that when you do this exercise a few years later again, it will look different. Let me share what I've learned. First, you need to understand that retirement today isn't what it used to be from what our parents told us. When you retire at 55 or 60, you're looking at probably 3 distinctive phases if you're moderately healthy still.
Could you break those down for me?
The first is the active phase, where you need as well the most financial resources because you're healthy, hopefully, energetic, and want to pursue new ventures and experiences. The second then is called the coasting phase, where you start looking more inward and spend more time at home and with your family. And then the third is the support phase, where you will probably need assistance to maintain a certain quality of life.
That's quite different from the traditional view of retirement as one homogeneous period. How should people prepare for these phases?
The first major shock for many people, and one I experienced personally as well, is the dramatic change in your daily social interactions. Think about it. One day, you interact with 50 to 100 people, maybe daily, making decisions that affect thousands. And the next day,
It's just you and your significant other.
exactly. And this is where many stumble. You go from being the person everyone wants to meet to someone who actively needs to create opportunity for social interaction. That's quite a complete reversal.
How did you handle this transition?
Well, not perfectly, I have to admit. While I read before a lot about it, the reality hits you like a brick wall. The first few weeks, my wife and I celebrated the next phase in life through some extensive traveling in Europe, which I called my W3 tour. After that, we ensured that we kept to some extent a similar schedule than before in terms of times where we were doing our own thing and where we came together. Still, I know that I drove my darling wife crazy by trying to schedule our days like business meetings. You have to unlearn some deeply ingrained habits because the instruments that kept you alive before are now to some extent completely useless or not shared by the people around you that are now your main counterparts.
That's fascinating. What would you recommend approaching this transition?
Start preparing while you're still working. First, Consciously build relationships and networks outside of your corporate role. If you like to stay engaged in business, and not everyone has to, definitely, then join boards, mentor younger entrepreneurs, and engage in community activities or get in contact with local universities. And if you're not into business any longer, then do some soul searching. What did you daydream about when you woke up at 5 a.m. for another 16-hour day? Or when you sat in another boring budget meeting? Or your bosses were particularly incomprehensive in their behaviors one day? Whether it is toy trains, motorcycle riding, gardening, learning another language, studying again, which, for example, I did, or helping in your community, whatever it is, just do it. But start doing it before you retire. Because here's the truth. It's much easier to continue something than to build it from scratch after retirement.
And what about the relationship with your significant other? This must require quite an adjustment.
This is crucial. Your partner has likely developed their own routines and social circles while you were busy running your stuff at work. You can't just show up one day and expect to be integrated into all of that. It takes patience, communication, and often some awkward adjustments on both sides. And expect tension. You lived potentially very different lives so far, so acknowledge it and build something new without disregarding your different histories.
Do you have any practical tips for managing this transition?
Yes, several actually. First, have honest conversations about expectations and boundaries with your partner before retirement. Second, develop your interests and activities. Don't become entirely depending on your partner's social circle. And third, consider running a transition schedule, gradually reducing work commitments rather than stopping abruptly. For me, it was setting my own boutique consultancy, which allowed me to stay active in an area which I still loved, with two crucial but lovely differences.
And they were?
Well, one big plus, definitely no bosses any longer. And second, a sole focus on things I love to do in my line of work. This includes the opportunity to say no. And this I did a lot when the projects in the last couple of years did not excite me at all.
That gradual approach makes sense. Any other insights about managing this social transition?
Yes, and this might surprise some people. Learn to be comfortable with silence and solitude. We're used to being constantly engaged, making decisions, solving problems daily, hourly, and embedded in continuous noise level. In retirement, there will be quiet moments. Learning to appreciate these rather than seeing them as voids that need to be filled is crucial for mental well-being. I've learned to cope with this with actually taking a full break and going on a silence retreat in Assisi, Italy.
And you told me that you had to decide which voices you still wanted to hear and which you had to tame inside your head, which is an interesting notion. Shall we move on to discuss how health becomes your new job after retirement?
Yes, and this is deeply personal for me. The decision to step out of the corporate world at a relatively young age of 59 was in fact based on the fact that I had to get 3 stents placed in my heart. Cardiovascular issues are with 30% the largest risk of Western adults to die earlier than they want. Stress, diet, lifestyle, and as well genetic predispositions play a large role here. And I had all of them pushing me into the situation. In any case, it was a wake-up call that made me completely rethink my approach to life and health. Really nothing special, but just what happens when you don't want to return to the operating table too soon.
That must have been quite a shock, going from running major organizations to running into health challenges.
It was, but in retrospect, it was also a blessing in disguise. It forced me to treat my health with the same seriousness I used to treat my corporate responsibilities. I lost 10 kilos, quit smoking, and now exercise 5 times a week. I'm actually, and I feel as well, healthier than I have in the last 20 years. As well, thanks to modern medicine and a very high focus on blood works and nutrition supplements.
That's quite a transformation. How should executives approach this health aspect of retirement?
Think about it this way. Your body is now your biggest project. Just like you wouldn't skip important business meetings, schedule just a daily 2-hour meeting with your body. And don't think twice about it. You used to spend at least the same amount of time in unnecessary meetings while working. And while you're at it, as well accept that the whole health system is actually what I call a disease system.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. How often did you visit doctors when you were healthy? The whole incentive system in medicine is focused on fixing you, not preventing sickness. Sure, you get the normal grumbling advice like eat healthy, drink less alcohol, stop smoking. But this advice without a good communication strategy to actually change the behavior does nothing. In addition, if your doctor takes your blood work, they focus only on the main parameters which cost the least, in line with what the insurances actually pay. But there are probably 80 additional substances that are in the second and third line of defense in your blood system, which are early indicators that you will have or not have a problem in your cholesterol, mitochondria, free radicals, insulin resistance, inflammation levels, etc., etc. A real good blood work costs you about 500 Swiss francs in Switzerland and probably the same in each of the other countries, which A, you will have to pay for yourself, and B, you have to study yourself to understand what function each of these elements has and what can happen when either it is too high or too low. And next, what you have to do then, if you're interested, you have to get into the goal zone again. And since we're on it, another trivia here. The average medical practitioner who studies for quite a while has little to no seminars on nutritional science. It's all about the problem fix, not the prevention. It is fascinating that we all complain about the ballooning cost of the medical sector, while subtle changes in lifestyle incentivization, be it social or monetary, would collapse the cost easily by 50% or more for the insurances. And here's a novel, even if simplistic thought. Turn the system around and pay doctors to a decent baseline for each patient. And then have a bonus-malus system based on their patient's life expectancy and health issues. Would the discussions in the doctor's office change with their patients? You betcha. More prevention, less oops.
I know that you had to get this off your chest, and you know that you are Don Quixote on this one. Getting back to what you said earlier, 2 hours to spend on your body a day seems like a lot. How do you break that down?
Well, that would make you Sancho Panza, right? But, okay, now remember how detailed we were talking about analyzing business metrics. If we apply that same rigor to our health and get the comprehensive health assessment we talked about, the whole package, genetics, nutrient deficiencies, detailed blood works, the whole shebang. Then use technology to track your progress with fitness rings, smartwatches, whatever your poison is. Treat it like a business transformation project, because that's exactly what it is, except that it is called personal transformation project. And like the anonymous alcoholics know, first you have to know that you have a problem before you can work on a path towards a solution. For me, applying my corporate rigor to my body was actually perfect. And then 2 hours per day is nothing. Think about how many hours you spend per day in nonsense activities and meetings. And think about the alternative. Existence, best pain-free, beats the alternative any day of the week. Even my normal quote from Deming fits here. Survival is optional.
And what about the mental aspect of health?
Crucial. When we talk about health, it's not just physical. Let me tell you a story. After I stopped working in corporate, I started to feel more and more, stupid. I had issues with everyday mental tasks and was terrible at remembering things. I panicked so much, thinking I suddenly attracted Alzheimer's or something, that I consulted a neuroscientist. She checked me through and told me that the same that happened to me happens to most high-power executives when they suddenly stop using their gray matter that intensely. Their brain, which is the organ that requires the most amount of energy in the body, it does what any other organ does in line with evolution. It shuts areas down that are no longer used to save energy. Remember, our body is a very intricate self-regulating machine. For survival in the past, you needed a much lower capacity of the brain than we are using today, and it returns with less use to this equilibrium. So, Unless you like a blissfully low-functioning brain, which as well has certain advantages, constantly stay mentally active. Learn new things, study topics you never had time for, try choir singing, play chess, play an instrument, understand certain sports you so far never had a clue about. Just keep challenging your brain. But here's the key difference from your working days. This is no race. You no longer have to impress anyone, especially yourself.
That's an interesting point about not having to impress anyone. How does that change your approach to health goals?
It makes them more sustainable. Instead of pushing for quick results like we often did in business, you can focus on long-term, sustainable changes. Think about it. Who wants to reach 85 after being sick for 10 years? The goal isn't just longevity. It's what I call health span, the length of time you remain healthy and active.
What about the social aspect of health? How does that fit in?
Combining physical activity with social connections and learning creates a powerful synergy. For example, I now take longer motorcycle trips across Europe, keeps me active, engages my mind with planning and navigation, and creates opportunities for new experiences and connections. And I hike now as well, nearly religiously. It's a fantastic sport for my condition and the only sport that I actually enjoy so far. And since I live in the beautiful part of Switzerland, what a treat. As well here, I either go by myself or with like-minded people, combining health and social activities.
That's quite different from the stereotype of retirement as just playing golf or sitting in a garden.
Yeah, nothing's wrong with golf or gardening if that's your passion. But here's something that I've learned. There's nothing that's age-appropriate for younger folks that you can't do. Try new things. Go on a 5-day hike or a 10-day bike ride. Heck, there was recently a 100-year-old woman who went skydiving for the first time, and she loved it. The key is finding activities that combine physical health, mental engagement, and social interaction.
This leads naturally to our next topic, finding a new purpose beyond corporate titles. How do you make that transition?
Many people, myself included, initially think of purpose in the terms of their corporate achievements. But retirement forces you to redefine what matters. For me, it became about making a different kind of impact.
Can you elaborate on that?
I've been researching greenhouse gas emission reductions through supply chain dynamics for my doctoral thesis since retiring. I'm running a podcast, this one. I'm mentoring, like for example, last year the World 50's Next Leader program, and many more things. These activities aren't just about staying busy. They're about contributing, hopefully meaningfully, while continuing to grow.
So it's about finding ways to use your expertise while exploring new territories.
Exactly. Think about non-profit positions, for example. Non-profit organizations with a humanitarian or sustainability focus often lack essential efficiency and effectiveness knowledge. This is where our corporate experience can make a real difference. Get in, analyze, improve, control, name successor, get out, repeat.
It sounds like you're advocating for an active, engaged retirement rather than a traditional withdrawal from professional life.
Absolutely. If this is your cup of tea, fine. I have a friend my age who does just sports and cooking. Great. If it makes you happy and you cook healthy. But here's the key. Any of these lifestyles require thoughtful financial planning. Remember those 3 phases I mentioned earlier. Your financial needs will be different in each phase.
Can you break that down for our listeners?
Think about it this way. In the active phase in which I am right now, you actually need the most money. You're healthy, energetic, you want to travel, start new ventures, whatever it is, or maybe transform a property into a vacation home, like I'm doing currently near Munich in Germany.
That's quite different from traditional retirement planning, which assumes expenses decrease after retirement.
Exactly. In your 60s, you feel already that certain aspects of your body are not functioning any longer than in your 30s or 40s. With little imagination, you have to accept that your active lifestyle is here and now, not as you might have put it off in your past in 5 to 7 years from now. Later then, in the coasting phase we mentioned before, Your expenses typically decrease as you travel less and spend more time at home with family and friends. And then in the support phase, expenses might increase actually, since you need more assistance to live comfortably. The trick is planning for all three phases. And as well, look into the reality of my generation in this phase. And I'm a boomer, right? We are in the Western world the largest group of people, and all of us would like to get care from a system that is not laid out for that. And as we know, it's as simple as supply and demand, baby. If the supply is stable and the demand increases, prices will go up, unless there is a new market entrant that changes this in a new way. But currently I don't see it. So in the last phase, have enough money available.
What's your advice for people approaching retirement about financial planning?
First, don't wait until retirement to start planning. Ideally, you do this in your 50s. Get independent advice, and I mean truly independent, not from someone selling specific products like your bank. Create a detailed budget based on about 60 to 70% of your pre-retirement spending and adjust annually. And do it detailed. You will be amazed when you go really in detail through your books how much you're spending right now and what you really need in the future.
Only 60 to 70%? That seems quite conservative.
Yeah. Remember, you won't be expensing meals or maintaining a corporate lifestyle any longer. But seriously, it's better to be conservative in your estimates. And here's something crucial. Plan for black swans like hyperinflation, tax scheme changes, housing prices drops, market crashes, or geopolitical events, and hopefully no war. 2 of the 5 have already happened to me just in the last 2 years since I have retired.
Speaking of planning, what about inheritance considerations?
In many Western countries, inheritance tax can be quite steep, up to 30% in Germany, 60% in France, and 40% in the Netherlands. In the US, inheritance tax is state-defined, so Iowa, Kentucky, Maryland, Nebraska, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania have one. And if you have total wealth over, I believe, $13.6 million, federal tax applies and it can go up to 40%. So you must balance what your country needs through taxes and your dependents' needs. But don't let tax planning consume you. Remember, we're trying to live, not just preserve wealth.
It seems like there's a delicate balance between being financially prudent and actually enjoying your retirement.
That's exactly right. And this brings us to perhaps the most important aspect of retirement, building meaningful routines and relationships that make all this planning worthwhile.
How did you approach creating new routines after decades of having your schedule dictated by corporate responsibilities?
You know, this was actually one of the biggest challenges. In corporate life, your calendar is your life. But in retirement, you have to create structure without becoming rigid. I learned this the hard way when I initially tried to schedule everything, including time with my wife, as I mentioned before.
How did that work out?
About as well as you'd expect. The goal isn't replicating your corporate routine. It's to create a new rhythm that serves your current life. Now I have what I call anchors rather than strict schedules.
Can you elaborate on these anchors?
Sure. For example, my morning exercise is an anchor. It happens every day, but the exact time can float. My research work for my dissertation is another anchor. It happens most days, but I'm flexible about when. The key is having enough structure to feel purposeful, but enough flexibility to enjoy the freedom retirement offers.
What about maintaining and building relationships? This seems to be a particular challenge for former executives.
This is crucial, and it requires a complete mindset shift. In corporate life, relationships often come to you. As we mentioned, people want to meet you due to your role and what it represents, or whatever title you hold. One former mentor put it crassly, remember, they kiss your chair, not your feet. In retirement, you have to be much more proactive. I've broken this down into 3 key areas.
What are those areas?
Well, first there's your inner circle, family and close friends. We talked already about how my wife and I grapple with things. With my 2 grown sons, I as well had to step back and ask myself, what would I have liked to have seen from my dad when I was their age? It's a very humbling thought process, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one who will have to realize that same old will not cut it. You have to evolve. And there's also no shame in asking your kids for their advice. At the end, you're there for them, not the other way around. Second, there's your professional network, which you maintain if you're still into it. But you will cut purely transactional relationships and just stay with the stuff that matters to you. Third, you can build new connections around your current interests and activities.
How do you manage these different types of relationships?
The key is being intentional. For family, especially your partner, it's about creating shared experiences while respecting established routines, as we discussed. My wife and I plan vacation trips together and as well maintain our separate interests. I enjoy, for example, being off for weeks at a time on motorcycle trips or pottering around in our vacation home. And I know that my wife is quite happy if I'm out of the house for a while. That might be not the same in each and every relationship, so it's important to be open with each other and define what each partner needs. And then adjust over time. For professional relationships, I'm very selective, focusing on mentoring and advisory roles that actually interest me rather than just maintaining status quo. After nearly 40 years, where I could not select the people working with me, unless they were working for me, I enjoy this selectivity a lot.
And what about building new relationships?
This is where those anchor activities become so important. Through my doctoral research, I connected with academics and climate scientists, completely different from my former corporate network. Teaching, consulting, and coaching, while my little company introduced me to the next generation of leaders in start and scale-ups, and the podcast actually created its own community. The key is to get engaged in activities that naturally create meaningful connections.
What advice would you give to executives about preparing for this relationship transition?
This touches on something fundamental about retirement in our era. We're not just retiring from something. We're retiring into a world facing unprecedented challenges, whether it is climate change, technological disruption, AI, or social transformation. We have a unique opportunity, and I'd rather say a responsibility, to contribute our experience to these challenges. We are still a big part, as we discussed before, of society in many countries, and just saying, well, good luck with the mess we created, we're off into the sunset, seems to be pretty egoistic.
As we wrap up this final episode, what's your most important message for people approaching retirement?
Well, remember this. Retirement isn't an ending, it's a transformation. You're not losing your identity, you're expanding it. And yes, there are challenges, health, financial, social, but there's also an unprecedented opportunity to reinvent yourself and grow while contributing to the world in meaningful ways. You just make sure to plan it as carefully as you plan your business strategies today.
And what's next for you, Daniel?
Well, as I said at the beginning, finishing my doctorate, writing a book about what I've learned in these nearly 3 years with over 1,500 academic papers, thousands of company feedbacks, and combining it with a long experience in how massive changes can happen in the business world if you, again, plan for it correctly. After that, we'll see. As I said, there is not a race, and I do not have to impress anyone, including myself, but I'll keep learning, growing, hopefully, and contributing on some level, just without the pressure of quarterly results or board meetings.
Sounds like a plan. Well, this pretty much concludes the episode.
To our listeners, thank you for being part of this journey so far. Remember, the next chapter of life can be most fulfilling if you approach it with purpose, planning, and openness to new possibilities. This is Daniel Helmig, signing off from the Supply Chain Dialogues for at least a year. Stay safe, be bold, and see you when we discuss the research, the book, and what it could mean for you. These are the Supply Chain Dialogues, produced and copyrighted by Helmig Advisory in 2025.